fire, the Roman Senate had rejected the emperor's bid to level a third of the city to make way for a Neopolis or urban renewal project. The Roman historians wrote that when the population of Rome held Nero responsible for the fire, he shifted blame on the Christians for hating the human race and starting the fire. Does that sound familiar? Here's another one, the Spanish-American War. By the 1800s, the U.S. was looking for an excuse to kick Spain out of Cuba. U.S. business was heavily invested in sugar and tobacco and iron. The USS Maine was sent to Havana in January of 1898 to protect these business interests for a local insurrection broke out. Sound familiar? 3 weeks later, early on the morning of February 15th, an explosion destroyed the forward third of the ship anchored in Havana Harbor, killing more than 270 American soldiers. President McKinley blamed Spain after the U.S. Naval Court of Inquiry declared that a naval mine caused the explosion. American newspapers blamed Spanish despite a lack of evidence. They said, "You furnish the pictures, I'll furnish the war." William Randolph Hearst told Remington after the Illustrator reported that the situation in Cuba did not warrant invasion. A number of historians and researchers later argued the ship was blown up by the United States to provide a false flag pretext to invade Cuba and expel Spain. The United States occupied Cuba from that point from 1898 till 1902. Although an amendment to a joint resolution of Congress forbid the U.S. to annex the country, which was the goal. What about the sinking of the Lusitania? Nearly 2,000 travelers, including a third of Americans, were killed May 17, 1915, when a German U-boat torpedoed the RMS Lusitania, a luxury British ocean liner. Prior to the sinking, the German embassy in Washington issued a warning. Newspapers in the United States refused to print the warning or acknowledge the German claim that the ship carried munitions. Wilson's government issued a flurry of diplomatic protest after the sinking and exploited the tragedy 2 years later as a pretext for America to enter into the First World War. Sound familiar? Nearly 100 years later, in 2008, divers discovered the Lusitania carried more than 4 million rounds of rifle ammunition. A false flag. There were literally tons and tons of stuff stored in unrefrigerated cargo holds that were dubiously marked cheese, butter, and oysters. Greg Bemis, an American businessman who owns the rights to the wreck and is funding its exploration, reported this to the Daily Mail. What about Hitler's dictatorship and the Reichstag fire? This is a famous false flag. It was from February of 1933, a month after convincing Germany's president that parliament must be eliminated. Hitler and the Nazis instigated this Reichstag fire. Hitler then urged President Hindenburg to issue an emergency decree restricting personal liberty, including the right to free expression and free press, limitations on the rights of association and assembly, warrantless searches of homes, property, confiscation, violations of postal, telegraph, telecommunications, permissible beyond the legal limits otherwise prescribed. Sound familiar? The Nazis used the decree and cracked down on their political opponents. They worked behind the scenes to force through the Enabling Act, which legally allowed Hitler to obtain planetary powers and establish a dictatorship. Later, they would admit that the people can always be brought the bidding of the leaders. That's easy. All you have to do is tell them they're being attacked, denounce the pacifists for lack of patriotism, and exposing the country's danger. It works the same way in any country. This is a basic philosophy 1933, Nazi Germany. Does that not describe what's happening today? What about the prelude to another world war, the Glowitz incident? 6 years after the Reich fire, the Nazi staged this incident. Nazi commandos raided a German radio station in Glowitz. The raid was part of an Operation Himmler series of operations undertaken by the SS as Hitler set the stage for the invasion of Poland and the start of the Second World War. SS operatives dressed in Polish uniforms attacked the radio station, broadcast an anti-German message in Polish, and left behind the body of a German known for sympathizing with the Poles. The corpse was offered to the press as evidence that the Poles had attacked the radio station. Do I need to say any more on it? What the Lavon affair, 1954, where the Israelis activated a terrorist cell in response to the U.S. making friends with Egyptian government and its Pan Am leader, who is Gamal Nasser. The Israelis were worried that Nasser would nationalize the Suez Canal and continue Egypt's blockade of Israel's shipping through the canal. Israel's Prime Minister David Gurion decided a false flag terrorist attack on American interest in Egypt would sour the relationship. He recruited and dispatched terrorist cells that pretended to be Egyptian terrorists. The plan, however, contained a fatal flaw. Israel's top secret cell, Unit 131, was infiltrated by Egyptian intelligence. After a member of the cell was arrested, interrogated, and revealed the plot, this led to more arrests. Israeli agents were subjected to public trial, revealing details of the plan to firebomb the U.S. Information Agency libraries, a British-owned Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer theater, a rail terminal, and the Central Post Office, and other targets. In order to deflect blame, the Israeli government tried to frame its own defense minister, Panas Lavon, but the true nature of the plot was eventually made public. Another false flag. What about Operation Northwoods? Some of you might be familiar with this, targeting American citizens. In the covert war against the communist regime in Cuba under the CIA's Operation Mongoose, the U.S. Joint Chiefs of Staff proposed a state-sponsored act of terrorism inside the United States. The plan included shooting down hijacked American airplanes. No, say it isn't so. It included the sinking of U.S. ships, the shooting of Americans on the streets of Washington, D.C. This outrageous plan even included a staged NASA disaster that would claim the life of astronaut John Glenn. While reeling under the embarrassing failure of the CIA's botched Bay of Pigs invasion of Cuba, President Kennedy rejected the plan in March of '62. A few months later, Kennedy denied the plan's author, General Lyman Lemonitzer, a second term as the nation's highest-ranking military officer. In 1963, of course, Kennedy was assassinated in Dallas under circumstances that are still very, very unclear that we may never know the truth about. So deception, even false flags in America is not unusual. And when they go wrong, people pay with their lives. What about the Gulf of Tonkin? A lot of people know about the Gulf of Tonkin. In '64, Lyndon Johnson went on a national television, told the nation that North Vietnam had attacked U.S. ships. He said, repeated act of violence against the armed forces of the United States must be met not only with alert defense, but with a positive reply. The reply is being given as I speak tonight, Johnson declared. Congress soon passed the Gulf of Tonkin Resolution, which provided Johnson with pre-approved authority to conduct military operations against North Vietnam. By 1969, over 500,000 troops were fighting in Southeast Asia. Does this sound familiar? Pre-approved authority to conduct military operations against North Vietnam. Pre-approved authority. Do whatever you need to do. Do we see that today? Johnson and his Secretary of Defense, Robert McNamara, had bamboozled Congress and the American people. In fact, North Vietnam had not attacked the USS Maddox, like the Pentagon claimed. The unequivocal proof of an unprovoked second attack against the U.S. warship was a ruse. Most of these things have come from the left. Are you surprised? Following the Second World War, CIA and Britain's MI6 collaborated through NATO on an Operation Gladio, an effort to create a stay-behind army to fight communism in the event of a Soviet invasion of Western Europe. The same kind of stay-behind army that we're planning on leaving in Afghanistan. It quickly transcended into an original mission and became a covert terror network consisting of right-wing militants, left-wing militants, organized crime elements, agents of secret military units, which we would call the protective services that we now provide in the wars that we're in. These so-called stay-behind armies were active in France, and Belgium, Denmark, the Netherlands, Norway, Germany, Switzerland. This was a strategy of tension. It was designed to portray leftist political groups in Europe as terrorists and frighten the populace into voting for authoritarian governments. Now, in order to carry out this goal, these operatives conducted a lot of deadly terrorist attacks that were blamed on Marxists. Right up to today, in our recent history, in August of 1980, Gladio operatives bombarded a train station in Bologna, killing 85 people. They initially blamed it on the Red Brigade. It was later discovered the fascist element within the Italian secret police. The head of P2 Masonic Lodge were responsible for the terror attack. Other fascist groups, including NWO, were mobilized and engaged in terror. They immediately claimed the lives of hundreds of people across Europe. False attacks, false flags are not uncommon. Is there any reason to think that the administration that we're under now would not do the same thing, or even the previous administration? Obviously, anybody that's hungry for power is going to do this, and most of these false flags had the same basic ingredients. The same thing we're seeing happening today. My goodness. So what are some of these tactics that I am claiming, as some of you have said when I screened calls, that these are just claims that none of this stuff is true? Well, are you starting to put it together yet? Let me start with, let's start with out of the Book of Rules for Radicals. And this is a quote. Power is all about power relations, but to advance one's power, one must couch one's position in the language of morality. Community organizers are political realists who see the world as it is. That's an important phrase. Not only Obama or his wife Michelle, but also all of their disciples and their minions quote this phrase all the time, straight out of Saul Alinsky's Rules for Radicals: see the world as it is. They see it as an arena of power politics moved primarily by perceptive, immediate self-interest, who morally is rhetorical, rational for expedient action and self-interest. Listen for this phrase as they talk to you in the future. see the world as it is and how it should be. 2, there are 3 kinds of people in the world. This is a quote from the Rules for Radicals. These are what Barack Obama has taught for years.